G'day everyone, popping in for our usual live Friday chat. I'm a little bit behind today. I had a job this morning that I actually had to go to, so I wasn't able to get here on my normal time of 12 o'clock. What am I, an hour difference, so hopefully people weren't waiting. I'm just seeing who's in online. We'll have a few minutes of pre-show. Let me just stick this up so that we know. And then we'll get started just once everyone realises that I'm on here live. So it should be an interesting show. Looking forward to what everyone has to say today about the Nikon camera, because I'm interested in going through that with you all as well. I've got some opinions that I want to share now that a few more things have been out. So who have we got? Rui's here, Epic Skies Photography is here as well. Nikon dropped the ball. Dominic's here. Carl's also here. Hector's here. What's up, David? Just getting ready for a big shoot I've got tomorrow, actually. We're going up to the mountains tomorrow to do a snow shoot. So I'm really looking forward to that with a few girls. Chris Amira's here. Hello, David. Another Corona day in Los Angeles. Yeah, it's not here. What is it today? It's 19 degrees Celsius today. So at least it's starting to warm up now. I'm so glad to say. Not as hot as what you guys are getting, though. So we'll be cracking a stubby with you guys soon. Carl said hello from LA. Stephen said hey. Mike's here as well. Java's here. Looking smooth. Thank you very much. I've had a shave for you guys today. Thought I'd better do something. What else have we got? Nice mug. Oh, thanks, Caleb. It is a nice mug, isn't it? Look at my little Sony mug there. How cool is that? Woohoo! Mark saying hi from Oklahoma. Hector said, one card slot. We're going to talk about this in a minute. And Mike said Nikon has a camera. Oh, I love you guys. You crack me up. Axiom says hi. Casper's also saying Sony, Sony, Sony. It's really interesting, isn't it, how everyone's saying different things, and it cracks me up. I've been looking at a number of reviews this morning. I think quite a few reviewers are holding back a little bit, though. Which doesn't surprise me. I often think, honestly, a lot of people that get sent to these big jaunts, these things where all the celebrities and all that go, you really can't believe a word you sort of hear about them. I noticed Kai did one this morning as well, and really nothing was mentioned about the one card slot, the lack of IAF and things like that. It was just glowing reports, and I think you've got to give the good and you've got to give the bad. I mean, clearly the second I opened up that camera and I saw there was one card slot, I'd know that there's a big issue. But these YouTube reviewers, I don't know. I just reckon half the time, I'm not saying he didn't tell the truth, but that would have been the first thing if I was there that I would have said, that there's only one card slot, unfortunately, but it was all left out of all these reviews, which is a really interesting thing. But we will talk about that. So we'll give it about another minute, and then we'll get started on the show. If you do want to get my attention, guys, just make sure that you put the @David Oastler or something like that, because it'll actually show up to me. Victor's interesting, said, hey, they def dropped the ball. How did Tamara say she didn't use the face detection when she was a portrait photographer? I thought when I watched that Tamara said there was IAF. I was convinced that I saw somewhere in that she mentioned IAF. I could be wrong. Let me if anyone else had that as well. But once again, these people are paid by Nikon to do these reviews. They're only going to say glowing things about them because they're on their paycheck. You have to take that with a grain of salt, unfortunately, what a lot of people say. And I suppose the end of the day, I'm not trying to push myself, but a lot of the time with any of these sort of things, you're better off to go to reviewers who aren't sponsored by these type of people, because you'll get a more honest opinion about what's actually out there. But then they probably won't invite us because they know that they'll get an honest opinion. So I'm not sure, but yeah, it is a bit iffy with some of these reviews that I've seen out there for sure. What else have we got? Nikon Mirrorless King. What else? Silky Sock said, do you think the battery pack will hold another card slot? No, I wouldn't think so. But even if it did, it's not good to force you to have another battery pack on there for a card slot. But I'd be very surprised if that actually happens. I really would. Silky Sock said, I pre-ordered the Z6. And I don't, look, if you're a Nikon user particularly, I don't blame you. It's quite a good camera. I certainly wouldn't be buying it though. I mean, I came from Nikon and I would have been tempted if it was in a major mirrorless release to at least have one to see how it was. But having one card slot throws it out for me completely, and I'll talk about that soon. But there's other features which I'll talk about which are great too. Delta Dave, the Adorama honks were the worst with their twisted logic defending the single card slot. And you're right, Delta Dave. Look, it does my head in, the people out there that will say anything for a paycheck. It really does. Johnson City said, hello, David. Had a great time shooting some minor league baseball tonight with the A9 and the 70-200 GM. You're right, it's amazing. I know, what an amazing combination that is. Spiral C said, Nikon didn't know Sony will launch the a7 III, and you're probably right, they probably didn't. That camera's been developed for a while. But in this day and age, there's no excuse for releasing a camera that is a single card slot camera. Not at that price range. There's no way you should be paying that sort of money and getting a single card slot. They are directly protecting their digital SLR line. They're saying that the quality on these cameras are basically, well, the Z7 is the same as the D850, and yet they've held it back with that card slot particularly. So I think that's a really bad thing, because they know professionals want to use dual card slots. And the Z7 particularly should be listed as a professional camera. I mean, Sony gave us that with the a7 III, and that was listed as their introductory camera, or whatever you'd like to say, their lower end camera, and we still got dual card slots on that one. I'm going to talk about that though. Surprised on the generic release of the f4 lenses? Well, not really, because I suppose they had to release some lenses on it, and I'm quite happy sometimes with f4 now that you can push the ISO, but I've heard the reviews aren't very good on that lens. So Wayne said even the angry photographer was down in the dumps after the specs were released. Excuse me. Hector said, I think they did it on purpose so they can sell the hell out of the Nikon D850. What's the new Sony in the next week? I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. Nikon want to sell your cameras every year like Sony do, or perhaps they're going to have to now. They're going to have to change this, surely. All right, so let's get started, because we've got quite a few watching. Guys, if you can, please give me a thumbs up. It just lets people know that I'm online. So if you can do that, we've got nearly 80, well, we have got 80 watching now, so I'd really appreciate a big thumbs up. I'd really appreciate that. Now, what are we going to talk about today? Well, we've got stacks. I'm just filling up my drink. We've got lots I want to talk to you about today. We're going to start off first with the Nikon, but let me bring up the Oastler Images logo, because we'll start the show from here. G'day everyone, popping in for our usual live Friday show. I'm just an hour behind. I had some things I had to do this morning. Got a big shoot coming up on the weekend up in the snow, so we're going to head up into the mountains. It doesn't snow where I live. You have to go into the mountains to see the snow here in Australia. But we're going up tomorrow with a number of girls, so it's going to be really good fun. I can't wait. We're going to have a similar theme that we've done before, which is like a little Red Riding Hood theme up there, which is going to be great. Obviously, the girls are going to also bring some fashion things that they want to do as well. I love doing snow shoots because they're quite challenging. I'm really looking forward to it. So that's what I'm doing on the weekend. Can't wait. Now, we've got a number of things that we're going to talk about. If you want to get my attention when we come back to the questions later on, there's two ways you can do it. Put at David Oastler or at David Oastler like that. And then I'll make sure then I don't miss what you're actually saying, because I'll scroll back to this first one of Johnson. So if you do want to get my attention during the live Q&A, please put your questions in there. I miss them sometimes if you don't do that. Depending on time too, I have to start skipping. So do that if you can. I will come back and leave enough time. Hopefully at the end we can go through it. These things usually last an hour or so, depending on how many questions you guys ask. So please go away there. If I can't answer something and I've missed it, just put it in down below, and I always try and answer all the questions that are there. I've had a read of nearly all the ones lately, but when I'm starting to get 20,000 views or even 40,000 views on some of my videos now and getting crazy number of comments, sometimes I can't answer all of them, but I do try. at least read them, and I'll put a little smiley face or something on there to make sure that you know I've read them. But leave those questions down below if you can't get your answer done through here. So let's go to the news today anyway, because there's some interesting facts that I wanted to talk to you about over here. So let's go here. I saw that there was this interesting size comparison coming up about the Sony a7 as compared to the new Z7 or Z6. They're basically the same size camera, but surprisingly close when you're looking at the two bodies, though, how similar they actually look. I suppose the main difference, though, is that the Nikon, I think, is definitely better in ergonomics, because it's definitely got a bigger grip. Now, I don't have an issue with these cameras because I have fairly small hands, so if you're looking at the way I grip them, I've got ample room and I'm quite comfortable with the grip itself and the way that it actually works. So for me personally, I love the Sony body, but if you do have larger hands, you may prefer the Nikon body, particularly with that bigger grip. Now, obviously, they're saying that there will be a battery grip there, but it's still being in development, so they haven't even got that released yet. So we're still waiting on that to be released. That'll come out, I suppose, in the coming months. But if we come back over here, you'll notice the size comparison is fairly good. It's interesting how different the lens sizes are, though. I would have expected Sony or them to be a bit smaller. They also look very Tamron-y, don't they? If you look at the lenses here, I think they do look very similar to what Tamron lenses look like. But the 50mm is way bigger than what the Sony one is. The 35, what's this one? Is this the 35? I'm not sure. Oh no, this is the 70 to the 2470, I think. Yeah, it's a 2470 is very similar in size. This is the 35. That's a 1.8. This is a 2.8. So you can't really count that as being the same, though. You would expect the 1.8 to be larger than the 2.8 version. But again, you can see here how much bigger the battery grip is. It's quite a bit bigger than what the Sony battery grip is. So if you had larger hands, it's definitely a bit of an advantage to have that larger battery grip if you're talking about the ergonomics of the camera. Again, this is the a7 III. I prefer the A9 because you are using more real estate with the A9 with the extra buttons. They've obviously put the little LCD screen in there, which you may love or you might hate. I would have preferred them to put another control there, but anyway, that's what they've decided to do. If you're looking at the front here, you can see the difference in the actual size of the lens mount. It is substantially bigger than what the Sony camera is. The height obviously then is forced to be bigger than what the Sony is. But overall, the bodies are pretty similar in size. So I wouldn't be disappointed if I was looking at that aspect of the camera. You can see the back there too is fairly similar in size. There's just a little bit more height, obviously, because of that lens mount. Biggest disappointment is this, though. I mean, what was Nikon thinking, honestly? I mean, seriously. To put one card slot in a camera of this type and cost, particularly the Z7 model, the Z6, well, I can't even understand them doing it in the Z6, but, you know, to do that is nuts. And honestly, I think that is the biggest letdown of this camera. And if I was a Nikon shooter, I'd be absolutely livid about this, because it's, I mean, I honestly used to defend Sony, and I did defend them when I first moved over, because I always had cameras that had the dual slots, like the D4S and things like that. And I was a little bit nervous sometimes when I did weddings. It was always on the back of my mind that what if something went wrong? Now, I had ways of countering that in the fact that I did use a backup solution. It was a portable hard drive, and I used to back up on the go. I'll see if I can get it for you, because I'll just show you what I use. So I used to use this little device. Now, you know, you can see here that it's got all of your SD card slots, You've got this CF card slot there. I mean the what is it? The one that Nikon are using, the QXD slot in there as well. It's compact flash. And I use this, and it has a hard drive in it. I think it's 200 gigabytes or something like that, 250 gigabytes. And I used to use this to back up all of my files on the go. And it's a really quite nice unit because basically it backs up the hard drive. You can see here as I start to boot it on, I'll just see if it comes up. And you can actually view the images. Now, there's nothing in here at the moment, but I'll just see if I can get a view there. On this, it actually says import photo because you can view the photos that are on there. You can do this by Wi-Fi. There's a little attachment that comes on it. You can also recover cards and things with this as well. So what I would do in the wedding, I would actually grab, and I bought this out of my own money. I would wait until there was a quiet moment. So I'd do the bride's sort of stuff in the morning, and then I'd back up. After that, I'd go to the groom or whatever, and then I'd back up. I'd do the wedding ceremony, take a few minutes, and then back up. And I kept backing up during the day, and it does incremental backups, so it's really good. So it will do incremental backups. So this is what I was doing. So I was conscious always of something going wrong, though. Now, admittedly, look, I did always have a second shooter, so I could... I've just got to turn this off. I did always have a second shooter, so I could, if disaster happened, at least I would have had coverage from Kerry or whoever I was using as my second shooter. And the worst case scenario is I could use this, but that wouldn't help if the actual card died during, say, the first kiss. If it just died before the first kiss, I would have lost it from my perspective. Now, yes, I would have had a second shooter, which would have still captured it. So I did cover myself, but I was always conscious of it, so I did that. Now, I always thought, and it never had happened to me, that I never would have had an issue with the cards because I never did have an issue. In all my years of shooting professionally, I never had a card fail on me. And the interesting thing was when I shot with the A9 one time, it wasn't long after I got it, I had a card fail. And it was during a dance concert. Now, that concert couldn't be repeated because it was actually their end-of-year concert. That is worth big money to me. And luckily, I was using the A9 and I had it backing up to JPEG to the second slot. So I was covered. I had everything there that I needed. Now, one card corrupted, the second card was perfect. And it's not that it just corrupted, I couldn't see it on the screen. This is the part that was bad because it was just very faint lines that were coming across the card and making looking like LED lights that were glowing all through the whole images. So the images were no good, I couldn't use them. And so that's happened to me. And ever since that day, I've just thought, oh my God, I couldn't go back to ever using a single card slot as my main camera ever again due to that fact that happened. I would never ever be able to shoot anything that someone was paying me money for in case if that happened again. I would never relax. It was always on my mind before, but I always had that thing about the card had never failed. And so when these people are telling you in there that, and I've noticed quite a number of the reviewers are saying that, saying, that there's no issue, this card is more reliable. Well, you don't know. This is the issue. Also, what happens if you're doing a wedding or something like that and the slot fails? This is the other thing that you've got to consider. Photo Record Toby said this morning, I looked at his review about this camera, and he said that he took his GH5 to Iceland, I think, and he had the card was fine, but his slot failed. Now, what if that's your only camera? What if you've got, say, that camera, you're doing a wedding or an event, and the slot actually fails? You're screwed. So these are things that you have to consider if you're thinking about purchasing this camera. So I've actually changed my thinking completely. I was like that initially because I'd never had a card that failed. But now, after it happened to me, I would never ever risk that again in a paying job. And I think Nikon have really missed the thing here. They should have put 2 card slots in this camera. I mean, the second cards could have just been an SD card slot. And I really think they've let their users down on this. And this is why I would never ever use any of these 2 cameras for production work or something where there's money involved, or anything where you can't replace those. They couldn't be replaced. So I think that's a real letdown of Nikon. And like I said, I've changed my mind. If you looked at my early reviews when Nikon users used to bag Sony because they only had one card slot, I used to defend Sony because I'd never had that issue. And people that have followed me for a while know that I had that issue because I talked about it when I actually got the A9 and I had that card fail. It wasn't the A9, it was the card. So it can happen, and now, like I said, it's changed my total thinking about the way that this works. So if you're dealing with, cameras like this where it's only got one card slot, you're dicing basically with trouble. It's going to happen to you sooner or later. Now, some people I know talk about having dual cards and then they just use it as overflow, and you can do that with the Sony cameras. You can actually overflow one card to the other, so when your A card fills up, it will then go onto your B card. And I just wouldn't recommend that either. That's also dicing with trouble, because if the card fails, you're going to have the same problem. Because it won't use the second card until it overflows, until that top card fills, and then it will go onto the second one. I'd buy more cards and continuously change them and have backups on the other card. I use 128 gig cards. I'm never worried about it now because I know there's two cards there that if ever there's an issue, the other card is going to be okay. The chances of you getting two cards corrupted are probably nil. So I think that's a real letdown, and I really think that Nikon have let their users down by putting one QXD card in there. I know they're more robust than what the SD cards are, but like anything, there is the potential for failure, and that's what they've got to realise. Yes, they may be more robust, but I'm telling you, everything can fail, including the slot. Now, we'll have a discussion about that when we come back a little bit later. Just going back to the size differences, you can see here that the sizes are very similar. The 55, look how tiny though the 55 1.8 is as against the 50. That's still, I just can't say how much I love that lens for its sharpness, its size, the weight on that lens. The focusing is just outstanding. I just adore that lens, and look at the size difference. It's just amazing. Again, though, the lenses look very Tamron-ish. Let me know if you agree with that, but I do think they definitely look Tamron. Now, considering that these are meant to be Nikon's ultimate lenses, I don't think they look like Nikon's ultimate lenses. They look a bit cheap. Do you agree with that? Or let me know in the chat and I'll come back to that a little bit later on. But I just think that these lenses, their first lenses that they seem to have released, look a little bit cheap. And I'm surprised at the look of them, to be honest. Anyway, we'll have a discussion about that a little bit later on. So next story, I just wanted to show this as well, that they're talking here about the price of the Z7. It's actually going to be £500 more than the a7RIII after all the reality kicks in. This is obviously euro or English, isn't it? They're talking about pounds. Looking at the specs though, like I said, we went through all of those yesterday, so you can check out the video I gave yesterday which talks all about these specs, and I think they're pretty close in most aspects. The only thing is that they're saying 10 frames per second, but the frames per second on the a7R II is a true 10 frames per second. The Z7 and even the Z6, it's cripple really, because if you want auto exposure and AF and everything working with all of the captures, it drops down to about 5.5. So they're sort of throwing the figures, they're lying a little bit in these specs. Yes, you can get 12 frames per second, but that's if you're dealing with 12-bit and without it having auto exposure and things like that. So if you're doing run and gun and you're just using aperture priority, you're going to lose all of your auto exposure features with that. So that's a bit of an issue. Focus points between the a7R III is very similar, and the Z7 is very similar. The LCD screen, I think, probably will be a bit better on the Z7, and most people have said that. EVF is basically about the same. Video is both 4K 30p, but they do have 10-bit out, and this is the main difference between the Sony and the Nikon. Now, I'm not sure whether Sony could possibly give us a firmware update to enable this 10-bit external recording. They probably could if they wanted to. I think they've probably only allowed 10-bit external because of heat buildup in this camera. So I think looking at what they're doing, and even the 9 frames per second or the 12 frames per second is only available without all the auto features working. So I think there's probably an issue with heat. So they've not allowed you to have that heat build up. So that's why they're taking that away from that processor, which is those continuous frames per second. And also the external 10-bit video. Now, there's a couple of things about that I don't really like. I don't think really is that good. They're forcing you to have an external monitor if you want 10-bit, and that's to even include log. At least the a7RIII and the a7 III gives you the Sony full profiles logs if you want to shoot internal. So if you want to shoot the logs at all in the Sony camera, you've got to shoot with an external monitor. And I do that occasionally, but I'm telling you, that really slows you down, and it is way slower than what you can get. Now, there's other implications with that as well, that face detect doesn't show up and things like that. So there's other things. Now, I'm not sure if Nikon works the same way, but it's never as good putting a monitor on the top of your camera as it is if you're just shooting internally. I would love Sony to give us that ability as well, and I'm hoping the a7S III gives you internal 10-bit. That would be unbelievable. So they're one thing, a couple of things that are differences on this. There's another thing too that I'll just bring this back for a second just to make sure I'm not missing anything else. ISO on the a7R III is much better than what... well, I shouldn't say it's much better because they have lower. They have a 64, which probably will help dynamic range. They have a 64 to 2500. High ISO seems to be much better on the a7R III, that you can go much higher. The a7R II and the Nikon Z6 is the same. So it'll be interesting to see how the low light performance is on the Z6 as against the a7 III. The LCD, obviously, the EVF is much better on the Z6 than it is on the a7R III, but the focus destroys the Nikon Z6. And people talk about things like, they're saying, oh, I noticed in the reviews that, you know, they were saying that those focal ranges of being 90% of the screen coverage and 273 pixels is amazing and it's incredible, you know, game-changing. I'm thinking, you've got to be kidding me. Look at what Sony are offering you there, 693. And the difference here is that that does make a difference. If this is probably perhaps why they're not giving you IAF, I'm not sure, but although no, it doesn't make sense because the a7R III has IAF and it has the same basically AF points as the Nikon Z7. So the a7 III will kill the Z6 in autofocus. Now, the other thing was it doesn't give you IAF, so there's no IAF on this camera either, and that's another big letdown as well, because if you're dealing with shooting portraits particularly, I use IAF all the time. I use it in weddings, I use it in all the events I do. I can register the bride's face or the groom's face, and then it's going to target their face and then lock onto IAF on them. And if you're dealing with shooting low aperture lenses like a 1.4, lenses like that, well, that really does make a massive difference. The difference between using face detect, where you probably will get the nose that's in focus, as against using IAF, where the eye is rock solid in focus, is a huge difference. So don't underestimate how good the Sony IAF is, and there's nothing out there that can compete with that. I know Fuji offers it. I think Olympus may offer it as well. But the Fuji, from what I've seen when I used it in the store, was nowhere near as good as what the Sony IAF is. So that's another downside between the two cameras. So they're two things that I look at. So number one was the single card slot, big fail. Big fail. That's massive. And that would be a reason for me alone not to purchase that camera. IAF is another huge one. Now, I could live without that if I had to. So if that was the only difference, I'd say, okay, the Nikon is a really good release. And I'll talk about, there are some really good things about this, though. The third thing is the battery life sucks. Now, you're dealing with what I think the A9 and the a7 III is rated about 600. I think it's nearly 700 shots. And you can probably get, I don't know, an hour or whatever of video. I think I've shot an hour roughly, and it's still going actually. But I tend to get thousands out of it if I want to shoot fast. Now, I did notice someone said this morning that the battery life, I think this was on DPR Review, they said the battery life was only rated at 330. Yes, and I know those figures, I don't know where they get them from, but those figures are totally wrong, and he said they were shooting 1600. But you can do that with any of these cameras. If you can just press the thing down and it'll just fire off thousands of shots before the battery dies. I think if you're dealing in general normal usage and shooting like a wedding or whatever, the battery life is not going to be good on that Nikon camera. If it's rated at half the capacity of these, it's not going to be that good. And they're saying that you'll get 10 to 15 minutes of video, which that's insane if that's the case. Now, I don't know. I'm still waiting on that to be confirmed with tests, but that's what the figures were saying, that you only get 10 to 15 minutes and you're getting 330. Now, I'd expect the battery life to be better than that, but it still doesn't compete with what Sony had. And it's really interesting because not long ago, Nikon users and Canon users were bagging Sony about their battery life. And also, when that was solved, then they start bagging Sony about the dual card slots. They were saying, what sort of camera, who would buy a single card slot camera? And Nikon have just fallen into this whole thing of doing exactly what the Sony a7 series cameras had. So it's sort of, in some ways, it's a nice modern release, but in other ways, it's down to the a7 sort of releases, the a7 II. And so it's way behind in those areas. It's way behind in that single card slot. It's way behind in the battery performance, and it's lacking the IAF. So there's some bad things. Now, just let me go through this just to make sure I haven't missed anything else. And I think that's fine. I did notice, though, that this came up, and this is one good thing about the camera, and I think this is probably what is going to beat Sony particularly, is that DP Review did a test on the Z battery adapter, and they're actually saying that the AF performance is really quite good. I'll just have a quick drink. Cheers, everyone. So what they're saying here is that during our time with the pre-production Z7, we mounted an AFS Nikkor 35 1.8 to the adapter and we're impressed by the performance. In fact, we found it sometimes focused more reliably on moving subjects than the native, which is interesting. So they're saying it actually focuses better than on the native Z mount 35mm. So in other words, the lenses are working just as good as the native mounts, or even better. They're saying down here that all functions worked as expected and it focused quickly. Continuous autofocus was impressive and is what we used to get this tack sharp shot of a toddler, which is there. You can click on it. I'll put these down in the link below. With this combo during bursts, though, our impression, albeit with beta firmware, was that the camera would sometimes back focus. So it's typical of using a conventional lens like on a digital SLR. They're saying that it had back focus trying to keep up with fast approaching subjects. So if it was doing something where it had to track, it was starting to struggle and do a little bit of back focusing. Now that may be fixed by firmware. Remember, they're talking here that they were using beta firmware. The other thing that they were saying in this as well was that the noise was much louder using the F-mount lenses with the adapter than what the Z-mount lenses were, so they were no good if you were dealing with video. Now, that's what we found with the adapted lenses on Sony as well. We found that if the noise, particularly on the adapted lenses and things like that, is just not very, well, it's not very good. It is actually quite noisy, and the tracking is not quite as good if you're doing video tracking. But it looks like what they're saying is that it's working really well, and this is probably going to be improved through firmware. So I think that's one really good aspect about this now. It looks like you're going to be able to use all of the Nikon catalogue of lenses without much of a penalty at all. So that's fantastic. A couple of other things that I've noticed as well about the camera is that they're saying on the video side that it's quite strong, but it has the same problem as, say, what the a7RIII has, and even the a7 III, in that it's not as good in full frame as what it is in Super 35 mode, because it's doing line skipping, particularly in this camera. They're saying it's line skipping, so you're going to have it'll affect performance and ISO. So you're going to have to use this in Super 35 if you want to get a really nice, clean, high ISO video file. The only one that I've seen camera so far where I've seen no penalty at all is in the A9. The A9 is the only camera I've seen that's full frame, that there's no difference shooting full frame as there is in Super 35, and that's one great feature about the A9. I just wish, I don't need profiles, but I wish they'd offer that for videographers, because I think that's just an incredible video camera that's not utilised to its true potential, because it is the only one where you can use full frame without any penalty or loss at all. So that's a really interesting discussion, and I'll come back to the chat about this as well, but it's really quite interesting that, so I think on par, it's not a bad release, this Nikon camera, but it has some major things where they're forcing you to still buy their digital SLRs, and I think that's a real big disappointment, and it's something what most of the reviewers out there actually aren't saying, and I think that's a little bit disappointing. I think the reviewers have to be honest, and I do think that having one SD card is a really big deal for professionals, and the price you're paying for these cameras and lenses particularly, they shouldn't be put down as a beginner camera that has one card slot. They should have put 2 card slots in that camera. And like I said, fire away your discussion and we'll have a talk about that a little bit later. And lastly, there's a fair bit about the Nikon today. There's not much Sony news though, so I have got one good rumour about Sony. Check out the size of this though. This is Nikon's 58mm 0.95 lens, and they're saying it's going to be $6,000 plus. Oh my god. It looks massive, doesn't it? I mean, it's sort of similar to the 105 when you look at that. That is huge. I suppose it's because it's 0.95 in its aperture. It is only manual focus though, so that's I suppose one problem with this. There's no way I'd be paying for that sort of lens at that price range for manual focus. I'd want it to be autofocus at that type of price range though. But that is one big honking lens, and there's no way I'd pay $6,000 for that type of lens. And they show an example down below of the Nocturus. I can never pronounce that name. That's a beautiful looking lens actually, but look at the size difference there. That's a 0.95 lens for Sony. This is why I laugh when Nikon and all that say, oh, we can have 0.95 lenses. Well, they're already on Sony. So this is the equivalent lens, and I think this one is around about $2,000 or $3,000. I think it's $3,000 actually, so way cheaper than what that Nikon one is going to be. And look at the size difference. That's nuts. So let me know what you think about that in the chat as well. So finally, we're going to go through one Sony rumour. This is really interesting because this surprises me coming up, because they're saying first rumours, and it's an SR3. First rumours about a possible Sony camera announcement happening next week. So this is crazy when I think about this. It says 2 rumours about a possible announcement next week. One of the sources told me that Sony might announce 2 compact cameras before IFA Berlin opening. I don't know if these are small point and shoot cameras or if it means we are also getting a new A6 whatever APS-C mount camera. For sure, it doesn't sound like we're getting an A7S now. I think it's more likely to be announced at Photo Plus. So that's interesting in itself, because what's Photo Plus? Is that November? Let me know in the chat. I'm not sure, but it's way down. So perhaps, I know Sony are going to hold off. Look, Sony are definitely going to hold off until the Canon announcement's made. And then they might just see how things go a little bit and then announce their cameras. I would have thought it would have been Photokina, but let's have a look what they're saying also here. That new high-end APS-C camera. So I've got a feeling one of these cameras is going to be an A6-700. I do think that now, and they may do that to try and take some of the sting off what Nikon has announced. And now imagine if they brought this out and it's doing 4K 60p. Could be interesting. Also saying a new A7S III. Well, that's definitely coming, and I can't wait for that. I'll be ordering that the second it's out. Hopefully I will anyway. New fixed Zeiss lenses coming in collaboration with Sony. Their Zeiss ones. 24mm 1.4 and possibly a 35mm 1.8. New Voigtlander FE lenses are coming. New 50mm 1.4 APS-C E-mount from Sigma. and new 70 to 200mm f2.8 also for Sigma. But the interesting thing here is that they're saying there's potentially a announcement next week. So we could be going to get an a6-700 next week. Let me know what you think about that, because I'd really be curious to know. So let's see what you guys have to say in question time. It's probably going to be a really interesting question time, I'd think. Let me clear that. I hate it when it jumps like that. It just jumps to the bottom sometimes. Let me find out where we were. I'm just laughing here that Jeffrey, we're having a nomination for Prime Minister here in Australia at the moment. You should become our next Prime Minister and give every photographer in the land a mirrorless Sony. Oh, I love it. Wow, that's interesting. Spoil said, my a6RIII brick my Nikon 85 with an adapter. Yeah, I've heard that a couple of times, actually. Charbak said, I probably want the a6-700, but only if Sony can put a flippy display and dual SD cards. Well, that's going to be interesting. I wouldn't expect a dual SD cards to be in an a6-500, though, or an a6-700. I'd love that to happen. I don't think it's going to, though, unless they make the body bigger. I don't know how they're going to fit it in. But I'd love that, too, and I would love an articulating screen. What else have we got? Joe said the Z6 and 7 are clearly not intended to be Nikon's professional mirrorless models. Yeah, but Joe, what you're paying there is the price that you will pay to get a professional camera. There's no reason why by Nikon, they're holding back. Nikon have held back to force you to buy a digital SLR. That's all they've done by holding those dual card slots back. That's the only thing I can say on that, so I disagree. I think that the Z7 particularly is a professional camera. I think even the Z6 is, really. And they should have dual card slots. There's no excuse for what they've done. Sony GM lenses expensive? Yes, well, they are. But also the new lenses are going to be expensive too, I think, for Nikon. Victor said the Sigma Art lenses are just as good and are cheaper. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with the Sigma Art lenses. James said, you're correct, it's no Nikon high-end, it's Nikon middle grade. But they have dual card slots in some of their lower grade cameras though as well. They clearly have just held back though on this. They've just held back. There's no excuse for doing that at all. But James said, but SD cards don't fail as much. That's true, but like I said, if it's a wedding or something like that, or any paid gig and you've only got one card, you're screwed. And that's the thing you've got to think about. Charbok said, a camera should always record to 2 cards and also back up to 2 external hard drives directly by the Type-C port. Vishpal said, why 300 plus pics on battery? They know Sony older gen for a long time and make fun of it. Yeah, no, I don't understand that either. I'm not certain why they didn't fix that battery. They've obviously tried to make it compatible with the other cameras, but I think it's a bit of a mistake that they've made a new mount, so clearly they were trying to think about the future. Well, they should have changed the battery in that as well. It should have had something that was comparable to what Sony have to offer for that as well. 330 plus being able to shoot for 10 to 15 minutes video is nuts. James said, how often have you had a card fail? Was it an SD card? Yes, it was an SD card. Yep. Charbok said 4 SD cards failed in the past decade. All high-end SD cards, 2 SanDisk, 1 Sony and 1 Lexar. James said, okay, I definitely see... okay, I see you, Def Gun Show, I feel you. I'm not sure what that means. Victor said, I've had 3 cards, all high-end. Is that fail? Yeah. Look, it's like I said, I used to think like... these other people were saying that, you know, who's had card fails. I never did have a card fail. I was obviously lucky. But I have had one happen now, and I'm never going to allow that to happen again. I will never rely on one card again, because if I didn't have that backup card, I would have been screwed. Gusto said, I don't know if it's already been mentioned, but I like the EVF far from the screen. I always touch the screen with my nose on Sony and move the focus. The lens roadmap 35 1.8 and its shape. You can disable the back screen though if you want to, and you can put that in your favorites menu, so you can just quickly disable it if your nose is touching that all the time. James said Nikon should have put 2 card slots in for that price range. I agree with you, they should have. That's for sure. They definitely should have. I had a SanDisk get corrupted and a Lex card just die completely during transfer. Won't even read at all anymore. And like I said, Dominic, though, the other thing that you've got to consider too is you might have a slot fail. It might not necessarily be the card. It could be a slot that fails. And if that's your only camera, you're screwed. Chubbuck said, if your SD card fails in a paying job, you should refund the people who paid you. That's correct, you should, but you can't replace the images that you've missed. This is the problem. And I'm covered in my contract for that. If that did happen, I would be covered. And yes, I would pay them back, but it still doesn't give them their images that they've missed. What if you've missed the first kiss? What if you've missed something like that where you cannot replace those shots? And that's the problem. Paying them their money back won't fix the issue. Charles said, yeah, it's also talking about the cards. Carl said, I had a CF card fail in my Nikon D800 and one SD card fail over a 6-year time period. Chuck said, protect the D850 and the D750. I think that's exactly what Nikon have done, to be honest. I think they've definitely protected them by only putting one card slot in there. Now, I'm sure future versions, I can tell you what's going to happen, and I'm sure this is what's going to happen in the future. They're going to have to start releasing these cameras more often. There's no way they can still follow their timeline like what they've been doing in previous cameras now. And I think this is what's going to happen with Canon and also Nikon. That you're going to find that Nikon may go to a similar thing like what Sony do and release new cameras every year and a half. And if they do start doing that, their development is going to start to die on their digital SLRs because there's no way they can commit to both platforms fully. So I think what you're going to find is at the moment they're protecting their digital SLRs. I think the next stage, maybe in 15 months' time, you'll get another one of these cameras come out with dual card slots, and then you can probably say goodbye to their digital SLRs. This is what I think is probably going to happen. At the moment, they're protecting their digital SLRs, and I think that was a bad move. Caleb said the A9 is super fast and it has 2 cards, Y XQD cards. Well, XQD cards are faster. They get the images off the card to off the camera to the card much quicker, so it would clear the buffer much quicker. That's why the XQ cards are better. I wish the Sony A9 had dual QXD cards, or at least one, and then you could have a super fast an SD2 for the second card. That would still be okay. Z6 doesn't allow USB charging. Why? I don't know. I didn't know that. James Paris said, wait for the Z9. It will have dual slots. Yeah, I'm sure it will. Spiral said, Sony colours. That's rubbish, mate. Look, there's nothing wrong with Sony colours at all. I've proven that. Go back to a video that if you scroll back through my videos, you'll see I did a test between the Canon 5D Mark IV and also the Sony A9, and it's not even the a7 III, which is better. Both with 70-200 lenses, and the colours were that close. Also, Spiral, I've never had a client that have said to me, and remember, I changed completely from Nikon to Sony. I never had a client say to me, David, your colours are different. I've never had a client say to me, David, I don't like your colours on that camera. It's rubbish. It's only pixel peepers notice those sort of things. Clients would never tell the difference. There's nothing wrong with Sony colours. Carl said all memory is subject to failure, even SSDs. Yep, I agree. I thought and Spiral, you're right, the Z6, I thought that you could do USB charging as well. Chuck said, problem is beyond failure, you can lose or leave the card at home. Well, that's true, but Charbuck said, I think someone should do a dual SD card RAID recording mode for higher bit rate. What else have we got? James said, I use a total of 4 cards, 1 pre-wedding, 2 wedding, 3 post-wedding, 4 stays in 2 slots. I only ever use 1 card, well, 2 cards. I've just got them backed up. And I'm using, basically, I'll show you which card I'm using now. I'm using these. Oh, where are we? I'm using this one as the backup card. So that's the 128 gigabyte SanDisk. And as my main card on the A9, because I need the speed, I'm using the Sony 128G. I'm using that one as my main card. And because they're backed up, I'm not worried about that anymore. I don't need to use multiple cards because it's fine. You're not going to get a failure in 2 cards. What else? Dominic said that, yeah, the lens very kittish. Yeah, I think they do. I'm surprised that they don't look a bit more high-end. If they're saying that S, which is what they're labelling those lenses as, is their ultimate lenses, I don't think they look like ultimate lenses at all. G'day, Photomaniac. How are you? Oh, excuse me. Spiral said the Z6 is a good deal. Not if you want dual card slots. It's not. Carl said, I think a lot of Nikon users will switch now. It will take years for Nikon to catch up. There is a lot of hidden stuff going on when it comes to the frames per second. A lot of confusing info. Yeah, I know it's true. They should show the real world numbers on that. It really shouldn't be giving you numbers where it hasn't got auto exposure and things like that on there. When you're saying it's only 5.5 frames, if you want that all to be on, like auto focusing and also your exposure on auto. So Photomaniac saying he's getting the Z6. Be interesting to see what you think about that when you get that. What else have we got? James said, I agree. I'm getting the Z6. The XQD card's going to kill me, though. Victor said, just ordered the DJI Zoom. Yeah, I saw that this morning. I haven't looked at that yet. I must look at it myself. Epic Skies Photography said, why get the Z6 when the a7 III is better? Well, if you don't want to change, if you're a Nikon shooter, I can understand staying with the Z6. I can understand why someone like Photomaniac is buying the Z6 rather than getting an a7 III because he's already invested into that system. And remember, if you're dealing with using your F-mount lenses, they suck if you're going on to Sony. They suck on any adapter. They're awful. Whereas I just showed you the actual mount. That mount works great with F-mount lenses. So I can understand that. And I think probably the next version will probably have the dual card slot. So it is going to be fixed probably by version 2 of this. There's no way, though, if I was coming into this industry that I would be buying the Z6, though, over an a7 III. I would be getting the a7 III hands down, just for the dual card slots and the IAF. Well, the Photomaniac said nobody's talking about the hidden cost of the Z6. Well, they're not that much dearer than the SD cards, Ike. If you look at the card I just showed you and the QXD cards, they're very similar price. They're not that different. I used to shoot with QXDs when I had my D4S. They were expensive then, though, but they're much cheaper than what they used to be now. And James saying, I already shoot Nikon, a ton of Nikon lenses. Yeah, and that's what I can understand as well. Spiral said, I like my a6-300 but can't match my D7 colour science. Yeah, but that's an old camera. There's major improvements since the a6-300 to the a7 III, the a7R III and the A9, and I can guarantee the a7S III is going to be even better. Sony have improved their colour science on their new cameras drastically, or dramatically I should say. Really, I think the colour science now is amazing. 10 to 15 minute battery life for video, yeah, I don't know what they're thinking there. What else have we got? For video, it's not good. S-Log causes banding in skies at 8-bit grading. You're talking about the Sonys. Yeah, look, I've never had a problem with it. I honestly have never seen banding or anything like that in my skies, and I've never had an issue. But I don't tend to push it. I expose correctly, and then I haven't had an issue with that. You tend to get these gradients or banding in gradients like skies and stuff like that when you want to push and grade it pretty hard. I'm using standard profile, so I don't have that issue at all. I agree, 10-bit, if you are pushing the file, 10-bit is definitely going to be better. Having 10-bit 422 is definitely going to be better if you're grading things quite hard in something like Final Cut or Premiere. The next Sony camera will have that. I'm certain that the a7S III will probably have 10-bit, and it may even have an internal. Carl said the new lenses don't look premium but cheap. I think they do too. I'm a bit surprised at it as well. What else? Epic Sky said, I bet the AF sucks on these. No, it doesn't. According to that review, the AF on the Nikon lenses is really good. So, and this is one area where we'll probably now have to wait until the a7S III comes out. Look, I love the autofocus on my A9 and the a7 III, and I do think now it's got to the stage where it's good enough. And honestly, I never have an issue now with autofocus running it on gimbals or whatever I want to do. The autofocus now is almost spot on, and I do think that the Canon may be a fraction better, and probably the Nikon also now is probably a fraction better, looking at these early reviews, than what Sony have in their a7 III or the A9 for video autofocus. But I think they're that close now that you're really just dealing with nothing. They are all brilliant now. And I've never had an issue now with focusing at all. With my a7 III or the A9, at all. It's brilliant. And I just don't really think I need anything better, because everything I basically shoot like that is in focus. So I don't need anything better now than what I've got. They may do it so it tracks a little bit better and things like that, yes. And that probably will come with each new version of these cameras coming out. So we'll have to see what the a7S III is like now, I suppose. But I don't think you can take it away from Nikon in the autofocus side of it. It seems to be really good. The D850 is amazing for stills focus. It's really good. The only thing where it lacked on is video autofocus. And according to all the reviews, and I can only base on what I've seen on the reviews, the video autofocus now is terrific. So I think they've solved that issue now. So we can't talk about that as being a problem anymore. What else have we got? Photo Miak said, I have a Panasonic, Nikon and Fuji, and also might buy the M50 for the wide. For the wife, he's saying. I wonder what he meant. Long-term Z mount will go further than E mount. Interesting. Prashyant said, I've never had an issue with S-Log. Banding comes due to incorrect exposure settings, which is exactly what I said. If you expose correctly, you're not going to have any issues with the banding at all. I've never seen it in my work, so... Yeah, but BS Live said, what, the A7 goes to ISO 50, but it's not native ISO. That's the thing. That there can be a penalty if you go down below the native ISO. Oh, excuse me. The native ISO is 100. The native ISO on the Nikons is 65. On the Z7. What else have we got? So yes, you can go to 50 ISO on the a7R III, but it's not native. So just remember that. I'm just checking what other comments we have here. Chuck said, don't care what the specs say. 2 shooters with the camera talked about their experience shooting them today. Chuck, though, you've got to be careful who you believe when you're reading when you're looking at these people shooting these cameras, though. You know, wait for real reviews that come out of people that aren't paid by Nikon to do these reviews or paid to go to these jaunts that they go on. Just be careful what you believe so far in reviews. Jason said, join late. Any chance of an adapter for dual cards? I wouldn't think so, no. Photomix said Panasonic has IAF as well. Yeah, I had that, I think, on the GH5. It didn't work anywhere near as good as the Sony's, though, Ike. What we're saying, what else have we got in here? Yeah, Gusso's saying, yeah, Fuji does too. The point is IAF, as the one from Sony nobody has. Yeah, it's that Sony IAF is better than anything I've ever seen. It's by far the best, particularly at tracking and locking on. It's unbelievable. I'm just seeing if there's any other things coming out. Anu said, I am basically watching this video to stick with the a7RIII and not get swayed away by Z. If you've got the a7RIII, there's no reason to go and buy the Z at all, unless you had a ton of Nikon lenses. Then I could understand it, I suppose. Benjamin said, unfortunately you can't see it, but this video is you trying to convince yourself and us that the Sony is better. It's a very biased video. Well, it's not, Benjamin, at all. I'm only talking to you about the facts. I'm not being biased here at all. I've said the things that I believe are good about that camera. I've also said the things that aren't good about that camera. One card slot sucks. No matter what you try and say about that, if you're a professional shooting one card slot, it sucks. And it's very dangerous to do that. No IAF sucks. The battery life on that camera sucks. There's other features that are great about that camera. Having the 10-bit, I've also said that. Now, this is where you're obviously a Nikon fanboy here. I've said there's good things about that camera as well, where it will be better than the a7RIII. Clearly, you weren't listening to that. You only want to hear what you want to hear. And that's up to you, I suppose, whichever way you want to say it. I'm telling the truth of what I believe that's good about that camera or not good about that camera. Just like I also say where there's some bad things about the camera. For Sony as well. Yeah, Chuck said that SIPA number, then double the figure. Yeah, I know. I don't know how on earth they come up with those figures. How are we going for time too, by the way? What are we on? A little bit over. Can you guys just talk for a second on there, guys? Because I think there's a knock on the door. Just bear with me just for a second. Just chat amongst yourselves. Okay. I'll have to watch some more videos because I know a few people are saying Jared Poland's got videos up and things like that at the moment. James said, Seth shot over 500 shots during his shoot. See Seth and David's interview about 3 hours ago. Yeah, I'll have to have a look and see what people are getting in those real-world reviews about that. I mean, I'm sure, like I said, probably the next version of this camera is going to be incredible. I mean, I would think, you know, if they put the dual card slots, I would have had nothing to complain about this camera really at all if they'd had dual card slots and it had an IAF. I'd still probably complain about that battery usage. But If they put those two things in, they would have killed it. But I think they would have also killed their digital SLR line. And I think that's why they've held back a little bit. What we need is someone like f0.95 to get it and then give a real-world review. I'd put more trust in that than I would for people getting paid by Nikon, particularly. Chuck said the 10 to 15 figure is found on Nikon's USA official spec sheet. That's for the video, obviously, Chuck. Is that what you're saying on that one? Ergos on the ZS look better. Yeah, they probably do. I quite like the look of the camera, and it seems to be very well made. Waterproofing, obviously, on that camera is going to be better than Sony if you're dealing with that aspect of it. It's probably, they're saying it's going to be as weather sealed as what the D850 is. If that's the case, the weather sealing is going to be excellent on that camera, and that will be way better than anything that Sony have. That's for sure. That's one area where Sony particularly could improve their camera. What else have we got? Gusto said maybe the core of the camera was meant to compete against the a7RIII. Interesting. Manuel's here from New Zealand. G'day, mate. How you going? 330 is akin to second-gen Sony. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It almost is about the a7RIII line. Harley said, new cameras, I hear Canon is good. How does their full-frame mirrorless stack up to the new Nikon? Well, they haven't released it yet, Harley. We've got to wait and see. They're saying September sometime they're going to announce it, so hopefully we'll know in the near future what the Canon is going to be like. P.S. Santa said the ZS would rock. Yeah, it's way better than what the a7RIII is, though. Yeah, way better than what the a7RIII is. Like I said, if you're talking about the camera as a whole, it's quite comparable to what the a7RIII has, apart from those limitations that I've mentioned, which are big ones. They're not just minor ones. I think the focus is going to be amazing on this camera. It's lacking the IAF, yes. The big one is lacking the dual card slots. That's the big one, and the battery life looks like it's going to suck. What else? I'm just trying to see if there's anything else that we haven't. Carl said 5.5 frames per second with exposure metering. Yeah, and this is the thing. They're giving you the extended frames per second, and that's wrong. That's just jargon that these camera companies can come up with. That's the true frames per second is 5.5. So if you're dealing with it really, that's true. Is 5.5. So that's what Nikon should have been saying, and not trying to hide the fact that they're putting out 12 frames per second or whatever it is. What else have we got? This is the battery size 1900 mAh against 2190. f0.95 said, yeah, I'm excited to see what Canon does now. Canon got to have a new mount too, I bet. Well, there's rumours around there, Ike, that they're going to keep the mount to their same as their digital SLRs. And if they could do that, that's quite clever in the fact that you would then immediately be able to use any lens that Canon has. So I'm not 100% certain, or I'm not sure which way they're going to go. Are they going to add a new mount to do what Nikon did, which is future-proofing their camera, which is a very smart move? Or are they just going to release a camera with an EF mount that lets them immediately not have to produce any other lenses? Because Canon they probably are the best manufacturer out there of lenses. Their lenses are amazing. So if you had the ability to use those lenses right from the get-go, that could be incredible. And they may do that as the difference. That could be a real interesting thing. President said Matt Granger is still defending the Z series cameras. He is going crazy. He's paid by Nikon for sure. He always has. Remember, he bagged everything that Sony released. He bagged the A9 and all these other cameras that came out there. Never liked Sony, so I wouldn't believe anything he says with them, to be honest. Yeah, also the buffer's not good either, is it? 18 shots in a 14-bit buffer. You compare that to the a7RIII, which you can shoot off basically forever. The buffer is way down on the a7RIII. Now, no one's talking about that either. They keep talking about that it can shoot that number of frames, but it runs out in 18 shots. It's terrible compared to the a7RIII. Henry has said the camera is fully compatible with over 300 lenses, and that's true. Their lens is fantastic range, and obviously that adapter works really good. Epic Sky said Matt Granger getting a 3Z7, so he will defend it. This is why I just don't trust. I'm not saying that's what's happening though. I just don't trust all of these people, and it's the same with Sony. I don't trust all of these Sony events either. I only really trust the things when they come out and shoot it in real life, because this is what I've said to you all along about people when there are these sponsored events and they come out all glowing and saying all these things that, you've got to be careful who you trust in these early reviews that come out. Victor said Canon is going to come out with a full frame for 2000. It'll be a Nikon killer from the get-go. Well, it's going to be interesting to see what they offer. What's that saying? Photomix said, he's just talking to other people. Gordon Lang used it. He doesn't seem impressed. I haven't seen that yet, so that'll be interesting. Epic Sky said Z7 is expensive for the specs you don't get. A9 you can find for $3,500. Photomix said everyone that has used it has nothing but good things to say aside from the obvious one card slot. Yeah, and that's a big thing for me particularly. That's one thing where I would not buy that camera, Ike. There's no way I would buy that camera to use in my business with one card slot. No way. Maybe a new firmware can add IF support. Well, it could be possible, Cody. Yes, it may be possible that they can add that later on through firmware. It's obviously a really hard thing to do, though. Obviously, to get the Sony IAF is a really hard thing to do, because at the moment, the only company that's cracked that is Sony. And that's a really interesting feature about that. So I don't think it's an easy thing to implement. James said DJI News. I haven't looked at it yet, James. I did get some emails this morning. I haven't looked at them yet. I'll have to look at that though, because I love my Maverick Pro. Might be a reason to spend some more money and get the new ones. I'll have to wait and see how they are. What else have we got? That 50 pornography. Cuba said that 58mm is 0.95 is for pornography. Henry said less than 0% of QXD cards fail if you leave them out in the rain. Not sure what that means, but Joe said the Z... Oh, here we go. It's jumped again. Where are we? I'm going to have to start skipping some because we're going to be here all day. Oh, boy. I hate that. Skips down and I just lose everything. Oh, I'm going to have to keep scrolling. Sorry, guys, but we're going to be here too long if I go through all of these. How long have we been going anyway? 1 hour, 13 minutes. I'm going to get abused again. Mark said, does the Z7 fix the autofocus problems of the D850? Well, it looks like it does from the reviews that I've seen so far, Mark. Let me just scroll back and I can see if there's any other. Joe said the ZSs are not professional models. Well, I think they are if you're looking at the pricing of them. That's for sure. I'm just going down to see what other things people are saying. If you do want to make my attention, just put that at David Oastler, guys, because it does make it stand out, particularly if we've been on for a long time. Dennis said, just came on, maybe someone already asked this. Could Nikon come out with a grip that has a dual card slot? I don't know, Dennis. It's never been done before, but we'll have to wait and see. It is forcing you to get another thing on the body, though, which I wouldn't like. I don't even like using my grips. B&B Film said, Sony a6-700, 4K 60 frames per second, new body with flip-out screen. That'd be amazing. Delta Dave said, why would Nikon force customers over to a camera that they can't deliver? Well, it is going to be interesting to see how they produce this if you still can't get a D850. So it is going to be interesting to see what happens in that regard. Steve said, I think the reason why the Z7 has one card slot is because the processor is not powerful enough. Excuse me, and that may be right, Steve. That may be the thing. It's still not good, though. BNGR said you can't put a memory card into the grip, and yeah, I wouldn't think so. I've never seen that done before. Just seeing where else people are mentioning my name. Benjamin said, I've only just found your channel a few days ago, and I originally thought you were offering a balanced view, but you are clearly a Sony fanboy. Well, sorry, Benjamin, you might be better to unsubscribe. Look, mate, I just tell the truth of where I am, and I'll tell it how I see it. If you don't like that, you're better off to just unsubscribe, mate, because, I mean, seriously, I've tried to give as balanced as a review as I can. I've mentioned the good things about that camera. I've mentioned the bad things. I won't tell lies. I'm not paid by anyone. I just say it as I actually see it. If you looked at some of my other videos, I've said where Sony are failing. It's just I'm going to tell you the truth. The channel may not be for you, though, if that's the case, Benjamin. What else? Carl said, can you talk a little bit about when you switched from Nikon and what was the first Sony gear you bought to get going? Well, Carl, it's a bit too long. If you scroll down, one of the first videos I started to talk about the channel was my switch. So you'll see they're discussed in videos further down. You'll just have to scroll down in my channel. I've got a lot of videos now, but if you go down to some of the earliest ones, you'll see the ones where I initially did the switch. And I talked about it. I talked extensively about what I bought and things like that from the beginning. So you'll be able to go way back. It'd take too long to do that here. We'll be here for another hour. But scroll down, Carl. You will see those videos I mentioned in there. Walter said in Fro's video, he even said the AF isn't that great for people moving around. It's okay, but definitely behind Sony's because of the IAF. Yeah, and that's what I expect. The IAF is just an amazing feature once you've started shooting with it. Dominic said the only way I would use one slot is for tethered studio work. Yeah, and that's true. It's a good point. For that, other Z cameras would be fine, but never for events or location shooting. I wouldn't be doing anything where it's paid unless you're tethering, yes, because then you've got to back up automatically. Spiral said he's ordering the Z6 but keeping the D750 for paid gigs. What else have we got? Well, Ben said there that image quality, it looks like it's the same as the D850 or slightly better, so the image quality is going to be outstanding, Ben. There's obviously not going to be anything wrong with the image quality at all. The D850 is an incredible camera. It's equal to anything that's out there. So I think there's never been an issue with the Nikon image quality, and there won't be a problem with these either. It'll probably be slightly better than the D850, so the image quality is going to be outstanding. What else have we got? Photomix said $100 for the 32 gig QXD 24, 32 megapixels only for 500 shots. I'm laughing at Liam. Pixel peepers need to stop staring at their brick walls and start having fun in Lightroom. Ted, hi Ted, how are you? Spiral D said, thanks for the reply. Photomix said, you basically have to buy 1,000 worth of memory cards to shoot a wedding. What else? Langston said, I've seen banding when I push the grading on my a7 III, but it's a matter of not getting exposures correct in camera. Yeah, and that's why I don't see it in video, because I always try and nail my exposures in video. Everyone's always asking me about what profile I use, things like that, because I think they think I'm using log. I'm not. I'm just using an ND filter and nailing the exposure, and then I'm not having banding issues or anything like that. So the trick is with you shooting 8-bit, that it's to nail the exposure. When I shot with the GH5, I did try shooting with 10-bit, but I stopped doing it. The file sizes were ridiculous. The editing then was longer. So I went back to 8-bit even on the GH5. So unless you're a full-on videographer, I actually wouldn't recommend shooting in 10-bit. The file sizes are too big. I'm quite happy with shooting 8-bit as long as you nail your exposure. Yes, there's a need for it, obviously, if you're shooting full-on videography and you want to be pushing exposure using log, but that wasn't for me. I've also heard that too, Tiki, that the 3D tracking AF is not working very well. I heard that as well. Henry's saying people are raving about the EVF. Yeah, well, I think it's going to be a really amazing EVF. Also, don't forget too, there's another great feature. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about this because I forgot. And this is where, Ben, I'm trying to be honest, Ben. I'm just talking about some bad things, but I'm also trying to be honest about this. Nikon seem to have nailed the touchscreen on this camera, that you can use the menus on their Z cameras. You can pinch to zoom. You can do all other things. Touch to focus works really well. So they've put a really good touchscreen on their Z cameras. It seems to be way above anything that Sony have given us. And this is something that I've mentioned before about Sony, that your touchscreens suck compared to what they should be like. And this is what I'm hoping, having competition now, and I'm sure Canon are probably going to do the same thing. Having a bit of competition like that, I'm hoping that the next camera that Sony put out has a decent touchscreen. Sony, if you're watching this or listening to this, for God's sake, fix that touchscreen. There's no reason why we can't touch the menus on the back of that and use it as a true touchscreen for pinch to zoom and do other things with it. They've showed that on the Z series cameras is now amazing. You need to lift your game. What else? Ted said, David, in terms of skin tones, which one has a more natural look, a7RIII or the D850? Well, I shot... Go back and have a look at that image I shot with the 5D Mark IV and the Sony A9. They are that close that one tiny tweak in Lightroom can match them perfectly. I don't think it's an issue with any of the cameras now. I really don't. I just don't think colour is an issue anymore. Dwayne said, can you tell me how much faster AF is on the A9 versus the a7 III? Love your work. Thanks, Dwayne. The A9 is definitely faster, not heaps though. It's definitely still faster than what the a7 III has, and I can notice that. But it's not a great deal. But it is definitely better on the A9 than the a7 III, but not a great deal. Hector said, hey Dave, someone wrote this in a forum, laugh out loud. What's that mean, Hector? Not sure what that means. What else are we coming down here with? A new parcel for David. Yeah, it was actually. I don't know what's in it. I haven't even opened it yet. I've left it in the house. Toe said the angry photographer. I should have done one, shouldn't I? I should have done one for the angry photographer for this. Is David funny or what? The only guy that goes live show and runs off. I love it. One of the reasons why I love the guy. Complete normal guy. That's funny. Well, I've been on here for, what is it? It's an hour and 23 minutes. You know what? I did this before and it killed me. I had a delivery come and I ignored it because I was talking to you guys, and then I got the thing saying I had to go to the post office to pick it up, and it did my head in. That's funny. Richard said the AP said Nikon failed big time with those cameras and lenses. Jeffrey said, I bet the knock on the doors from the Nikon fanboys. See, all you guys are now starting to bag me as I ran out. Did you see Jason Lanier's video talking about him getting excited for Nikon and Canon all of a sudden? Yeah, I bet. He's a free agent now. Yeah, and that's because I suppose he's, he's not, I notice he's not on the Sony list anymore of being one of their photographers. So yeah, he probably is a free agent. So yes, I did notice that photo, Miak. Now it'd be interesting to see if he jumps over to Canon or Nikon, I suppose. Carl said, I like Jason though, he's a nice bloke. Angry Photographer has very limited technical knowledge. G'day Manny, how are you mate? Good to see you in here. Eric Rossi is a bad photographer but gives advice. I don't get it. What's not that good? I haven't seen his photography, so I wouldn't know if he's a bad photographer. What else have we got? Long Rider said Nikon made these for amateurs to protect their pro line, and I think they did. That's a bit unfortunate, though, I think. Could be the case. Hector said, I do weddings. There's no way I will shoot with one card slot shooting wedding and events. Yeah, and I agree with you. There's no way, no, I'd do that either. There's no way I would shoot a wedding with one card slot anymore. I'm just scrolling down to see if we can get through this, guys, because it's nearly an hour and a half. I better go and have some lunch. Java said, we buy insurance for a reason. I have enough stress without having to worry about losing images or swapping batteries. Yes, Java, I have insurance as well. But you have an ethical obligation to the couple that you're shooting in a wedding as well. I don't know how I'd live with myself if I missed something like that, like the first kiss or something that I could not replace. And that's one thing that you have to consider. Manny said he wouldn't leave Sony, but would probably diversify. Are you talking about Jason, Manny, or... Photomic said that's true. Canon already has huge money, so they could stand to keep their mount if possible. Yeah, and I really think if Canon keep their E mount, it will be incredible. The EF mount, it will be unbelievable because you could use their lenses straight away. That'll be a fantastic thing. Where else are we? Always does this. It does my head in when it jumps. Went past that. That was fine. Went past that. That was fine. Walter said, did you see the prototype pic of the Z mount 24-72.8 with the screen on it? It has to be a 1600 lens. No, I never saw that at all. I'm scrolling down fairly fast, guys, to see if we can get through this. DL said 5-axis IBIS drops to 3-axis when using the adapter. Yes, it does. I'm not convinced, though, that Sony is also 5-axis, is it, when you're using not native lenses? I think it's only 5-axis when you're using native lenses as well. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but people have said that it works quite well with the adapter. Grape said the Z7 only gives you live view at up to 5.5 frames per second. At 9 frames, you get 12-bit RAWs. The a7RIII, you get 10 frames per second. Exactly. That is one difference there. TM said, huge mount, but no 1.2 and 1.4 in the near future. Nikon said 2020. Yeah, you're going to have to wait. James said, I like you. You keep me in stitches. Take a drink. Coronas for everyone. Thanks, James. What else have we got? Photomiac said, James Parrish, one of these days I might do a tipsy. You should, Photomiac. Start cracking a stubby. We'll have to do a live chat between us. I'll have to have you on in a live show with me. I'll have to work out how to do it. We should have a live show together because you're always on here supporting me. Spiral D said, thanks for the reply, no worries. Epic Sky said the a7S III will have the best touchscreen. I hope it does. I hope they improve it, because that's one area where Sony could seriously improve their cameras. Photomix said, Epic Skies, I once lost a third of the wedding and had to refund half the cost. Basically a second Z6. Was that due to a card, Photomix? I'd love to know. Joe said, one slot... Oh, God, here we go again. Where are we? Joe said, one slot, no IAF battery, no buffer, no touchscreen focus while using EVF. Well, that you haven't got that with the A9 either, Joe. So I count that. It bugs me a little bit with the A9 that they don't give us that. I don't know why they don't. So I'm not that worried about the touchscreen with the iFocus, but definitely no, one card slot is a problem. No IAF is a problem. The battery is also an issue as well. Casper said, some people just don't get how great the IAF is Sony cameras. I know, until you've used it, you just don't understand that. Photomix said, yeah, it sucked big time, not even going to sugarcoat it. I was able to recover some of the photos, but not all. Was that, oh, so a card failed? Yeah. TM said, one card slot camera can ruin your business fast, especially social media. That's right. I just wouldn't do it. I would never, ever do it again after it happened to me. Ever. And I think I was probably stupid for being so blasé about it, to be honest. Fro just put up hands-on experience with the Z7. It looks amazing. Hands-on experience looks amazing. Thanks, Terry, for sharing that. Carl said, ooh, people ripping into David about being a Sony fanboy need to watch his rant videos about YouTubers. I know they can't... See, people call you a fanboy because you say good things about it, but I try to be as balanced as I can. I've just said in there that Sony's screen at the back sucks. And if I think Sony is wrong, I'll say it's wrong. And I do try and be as balanced as I can. I'm just going to say it as it is. I'm not going to sugarcoat the Z series to appease Nikon fanboys that are out there. It's just not going to happen. There are areas where I think that camera sucks. I've said the good features about that camera, and there are good features about it. But I'm going to tell the truth. What else? Spiral D said, wait for the a6-700 fix. Hope they fix the rolling shutter. Well, you'd have to think it was better than what the a6-300 is and the a6-500. The a7 III is better. I'm hoping the a7S will be better, or an a6-700 may be better than the a6-300. The rolling shutter on the a6-300 and the a6-500 is not good. Ted said, watched your vid about skin tones. Thanks. I'm glad you watched it, Ted. What else? We're just about to the end, actually. Ted Shield said, gonna subscribe to your channel, bro. You seem legit. Oh, thanks, Ted. I'm glad you say that. I try to be. Like I've said to you, I do try and be as honest as I can be about everything that's there. James, thank you so much, James. Corona on you. The thing is too, guys, that you've got to remember that I am not sponsored by... Photomix isn't either, and he's on here. We're not sponsored by anyone. And so we try to be as honest and as basically to just see it as we see it. Now, I do love Sony gear, but there's things where Sony also do the wrong thing, and I've mentioned that before to you all, where I think that they suck. You know, and I haven't been sort of glowing on the G-Master lenses. I've been shooting more of the f4 lenses and their primes. The G-Master lenses are amazing, but I've sort of tried to say that they're not for me. But, you know, I try to be as honest as I can be about things. I also turn down an awful lot of things where people ask me to review things, and I think if I wouldn't use them, I'm not going to basically review them or even promote them. Like I've said to you, 2 Cape Backdrops have contacted me about being an ambassador for them. And I've accepted that because I use their backdrops anyway. And the only thing I have to do is mention the backdrops and show how I put them together at the beginning. But they're backdrops that I would order anyway. And they're not paying me though, they're just supplying me with the backdrops. And if anyone is sponsored or whatever, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to be upfront and explain that. Everything that I've given you at the moment has been paid for by me out of my own funds. So everything that I talk about at the moment I'm using as a user, and I've paid for it out of my own business. So, you know, so I do try and be as honest as I can be. But that's about all for today, guys. And thank you, James, so much for giving the donation. I really appreciate that. We've gone for an hour and 34 minutes. I'm going to get abused in the chat again for going so long and these sort of things. If you're a Nikon shooter, I mean, you still must be fairly excited. At least now you've got something that you can go to for mirrorless. I do think you'll probably find when the next camera comes out, it's probably going to have the features that I've just talked about that are missed. So if you did want to buy into that system, at least probably version 2, which may be in 12 to 15 months, probably will have those features put in them. It's just a bit of a letdown, I think, at the moment that you haven't got them. And that's why I'd say I'd still probably prefer to go the a7RIII rather than the Z series cameras if you're just coming into this area, because of that dual card slots and the IAF mostly and the battery. But thanks for following, guys. If you can, I'd love a big thumbs up if you can. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't subscribed, even though Angry tells you not to do that. And I'll see you all soon for the next video. I'm looking forward to the snow shoot tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. I'll probably film some of that and post some up for that as well. Oh, thank you so much, Joe. Really appreciate it. Don't forget to say pineapple. What does that mean? What does pineapple mean? I don't know what that means. All right, guys. Catch you all soon, and I'll see you all for the next show. Bye for now.